have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host Coale, and with me as always I have my good friend and co-host Aaron. Aaron. I was going to come up with a clever intro, but never mind. That maybe for another rainy day I will save that with that sort of response there. Need to change it up. You need some Jesus.
I do.
Yes. You know, and I'm sure with the film The Omen we're going to get plenty of it, right?
Yeah. Give it to me. Put the good Lord inside me. Or whatever they say.
My God. And now I'm just off on the podcast tangent or whatever. Have you heard of this? A comedian named Mateo Lane?
Oh,
he is very, very funny. He's a New York local comedian. Super funny. But he was just like, man, there is nothing like gayer than church. Because, you know, you're singing songs about Jesus going, I love him. And I'm like, girl, me too. Yeah.
There are just like ripped depictions of him in nothing but a loincloth hanging up on the church if you're Catholic, man.
I know. My brother showed me the masterpiece that was Buff Jesus.
Buff Jesus!
Yes,
Yeah.
you know about the animated series?
Oh, there's an animated series? Okay.
Yeah, like on
you were talking
YouTube.
about just like
Just regular Buff Jesus.
No, there's like a specifically disturbingly buff depiction of Jesus, like sculpture. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Okay, yeah, like the statue.
Sculpture. Yeah. Oh yeah, the South Korean. Yeah. That
Man, South Korea is way more Christian than we are. God dang. Yeah, so we're talking about The Omen today. Do you know anything about The Omen?
No. I know. I mean, it was like sort of a cultural thing during our like young adulthood, right? It's not that old of a movie, right? 90s?
Or 76.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh, it's an old one. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. In my mind, I always mashed this and The Exorcist together, and now I've seen The Exorcist, so I just don't know what The Omen is.
Yeah. I only know a few things about The Omen. First off, it's directed by Richard Donner, which if you don't know him, he directed Lethal Weapon and The Goonies, as well as the first two Superman film. So, yeah, he did that. It has the boy Damien there.
Okay. He sounds familiar.
And really, the whole reason why I know about The Omen is, again, with early YouTube culture and everything, I believe this is the movie that has the sort of like that creepy, intense music.
Okay.
I know they even did they did it for so many videos, and so did early YouTube reviewers or whatever. Like I could think of a Spoonie One's review where they did it, as well as them parodying it in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series. So literally, like, that song I always associate with. I never sought it out because, again, as I mentioned before, like on films like The Exorcist and stuff like that, religious horror is always like that weird territory for me where it falls right out of my comfort zone, where it's just like, it's hitting a little too close to home, essentially.
Right.
And so that's where it gets me a little bit, but again, with these past few films, I'm like, you know, we probably should go back to like one of the horror classics, like ones that usually like pop up whenever they do discuss horror. And while The Omen, I don't think pops up quite as often as other films, I know it pops up every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, I heard about it a lot growing up. I just don't know anything about it. Is this the one with the spider walking like the?
I don't think there's a spider.
No, not like a spider, but like the upside down.
Oh, that's the Exorcist.
That is the
Exorcist. That was in the
that
extended edition of the Exorcist, which is why we didn't see it.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Exorcist, that was an extended clip, which a lot of people hate because it just ended up being goofy seeing Reagan do the spider climb on the wall there. But we didn't see it because we watched the original cut, the OG.
I always mix these things together. I think it's the religious horror cult classic kind of. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know how similar this is to The Exorcist at all. Honestly.
Yeah, I have no idea either, so I'm very curious on how this film's going to end up being for us. So y'all better start praying for us, because we're going to take a look at The Omen.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby, yeah.
It's now a Coale show. He is evil.
And we are back from watching The Omen. And Aaron, what feeling do you muster after watching The Omen?
I feel pretty good about the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Positive. All positive.
Very
Nothing-
uplifting.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, that was a sort of an ominous film, really.
Yeah.
all throughout.
Yeah, I was very surprised with the film or whatever, because, you know, people have described it as similar to The Exorcist and everything, where it's like that sort of slow burn over time and dealing with the situation. And as I mentioned before on the episode, I actually wasn't quite big on The Exorcist. I liked it, and maybe it'll be one of those films that I end up liking a little bit more on a second repeat watch. But I remember I gave it like a 5 out of 10, just like average of the line there. So I had my expectations set not low, but just middling there. But I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this film.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of stuff to like about it, but also to contrast with the very serious, ominous tones, they have some goofy stuff that pops up every now and then.
Yeah.
That does deflate the tension a little bit. But overall, I enjoyed it. But yes, very disturbing, ominous, and quite a few scenes.
Yeah, disturbing's what I was thinking of, like, throughout. It shares that quality with The Exorcist, but in a different way. You know, I left The Exorcist being like, that was art and also very disturbing, and I don't want to witness it again, even though I recognize that it was good, you know what
Yes.
I mean? Like, this one, like, I would watch again. It was disturbing, but not in, like, the same way, I guess. But it was just, like, an overall slow burn disturbing.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I think it's definitely a film that I feel like most people could watch. I think I think definitely, if religious horror definitely kind of gets to you like it does to me a little bit there, it definitely builds enough tension there, but it definitely doesn't like disgust me where I'm just like, oh gosh, no, I can't.
There are parts of The Exorcist that are just disgusting.
There were some parts that I will never remove from my mind from that film there, but yeah, I definitely liked it a ton, and I guess we'll dive into more of the finer details of it there. Yeah. So basically, The Omen is about a man who has lost his child during his wife's birth, and then he's given the prospect by one of the people there saying, hey, this child was just born this day as well. Why don't we just give the baby?
Do a little swapperoo.
Just a little swapperoo there, because the mom apparently died during child labor, and, you know, what could go wrong? You know, nobody's going to notice a thing.
And he looks just like you. And he's had some trouble him and his wife have had trouble having a baby. And he's like, hey, the wife doesn't have to know. You can just take this child. he looks just like you. She doesn't even ever have to know. Nothing could go wrong.
Yeah, and nothing goes wrong, and it's a happy film the rest of the time. Totally.
The end. So what's the next film we're watching?
Yes, I know, right? Thanks for listening to this review. Yeah, so premise-wise, I mean, it's good. It's good, and it's one of those things where Gregory Peck is actually the lead actor playing Robert Thorne.
I didn't know that.
I know. I was very surprised by that. I was just like, oh, okay. You know, I only know him from To Kill a Mockingbird, which which he obviously was amazing in that role. And I'm gonna be honest, the stuff they present his character in the film would be very hard to convey and believe. But he manages to do it in such a believable way. Like, just the fact about swapping some kid whose mom died during childbirth and just pretending it's your own kid and everything there. It's like, if you wrote it down on paper, it's like, no, there's no way you can convince me that they would, but they do.
Yeah.
And again,
it's a different time. I totally believed it because he's like a fairly affluent, and he's Gregory Peck, so he's just like, yes, well, I'm gonna drink some whiskey, and I don't really care what the women say about it. It's a child. What's the difference?
yeah. Like I'm gonna be honest. Like if any actor was given that, it's a hard thing to play off and believe naturally that they would do that.
It has to be set like in this time period or before, because if this was like a 2024 The Omen, he's just like, well, we'll just do a little swap-a-roo. Everybody would be like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy?
Like,
this guy's like, well, Mr. Ambassador, if you say so, yes, and swap the children.
Yes, yeah. So it's one of those premises where like it makes it work despite a few areas that you would think there'd be a lot of road bumps there.
Yeah.
You don't have to have like a complete suspension of belief, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like,
Right.
That, you believe that this character would, but the character is also not like an idiot. He's just thinking like, well, we've tried to have children. I don't really want to see my wife sad. And plus, I'm helping this kid who's now orphaned,
Free baby. So,
Yeah, free baby.
pass on that deal.
Yeah, and whenever the story progresses on, that's whenever more omens, let's see the title of the film, start to occur, especially once Damien, which is the child's name, reaches the age of 5, and plot-wise, I think it's very good. It's a very good plot, leaves a lot of suspense and mystery there. I wasn't expecting it to be such a big mystery, like they're solving all the stuff there, as opposed to like just sort of like that suspense there, kind of like how The Exorcist was. Like, true, it could be like a mystery per se on like how are we going to fix it, but it's just more about just being in that moment and just kind of witnessing Reagan being possessed in that film. Right. Whereas this one ends up being kind of a mystery, which is a little surprising, but I also don't mind, and it's believable too, because again, he's a very powerful rich man, and so he's able to go on these journeys and everything else. And I like that it's set in Europe, which allows them to travel to a lot of important cities and everything else like that. So I think, I don't know, I'm a pretty big fan of the plot overall.
Yeah, the plot and the setting, I think, were both well served. Yeah, because they do kind of hop all over Europe, but for several important religious signs, you know what I mean? Just because it's a very religious mystery movie. And I think with that, the sort of plot of like, religious horror suits itself really well for mysteries, because it's already kind of crowded in like, these ancient things happened and they were mystical, you know what I mean? So it's already like, yes, revelations and the signs.
Yes, revelations and signs.
You get to go see old wise men in cloaks, and they'd be like, yes, I'm chanting over candles, or whatever,
Yeah, and obviously, since it's a mystery, we can't divulge too much about the plot and give away some of the surprises and spoilers there. Right. But let's talk about some of the actors. Let's talk a little bit more about Gregory Peck. Again, we've I've alluded to it before, but he really is a really great actor. And he's given a lot of prompts that I think a lot of people would have a hard time making believable. But he does. And I think it is just because of more of the, like, he's very cool, calm, collected, and taking things in stride. And it's definitely some situations where he's presented with some evidence that he tries to dismiss. But at the same point, I feel like he's not even being entirely ignorant. Because there's a lot of films I've seen whenever they're trying to tell the main character, like, oh, doom is coming this way, and they're just completely dismissive, and they're like, get out of here, see? Right. But at the same time, I feel like while he's, like, not buying into it, he's at least hearing them out. Yeah,
he's kind of portrayed as, like, one of the most trusting, but also still level-headed people, despite the baby swap thing, you know what I mean? Yeah. He's still like, well, what do you have to say? Oh, I've heard you out, crazy man. Now get the fuck out of my sight.
Exact line from Gregory Peck himself. And maybe it also helps that he's in the world of politics, so he literally has to do that for his job.
Yeah, I suppose so. He probably hears more lunatics than the average man,
Yeah, but he genuinely does a really good job carrying the film and everything. Because I'm gonna be honest, like I said, the only thing I ever knew about the Omen was the child Damien, and so I thought like, okay, this is gonna be sort of the main pull, the main attraction. It's kind of like the same sense where, you know, it's like in The Exorcist, Reagan is the thing everybody remembers,
Right.
but while I forgot his name, I think about more of the father who's having doubt in myself. That was where my connection was at from an audience member.
Well,
So
I mean, that's a lot of the focus too. But I think it was a really clever choice by the film to really not give Damien like any dialogue ever.
Yeah.
He talks. He is a talking child.
Yes.
He's a normal kid, but he's like kind of shy, and like most of the time whenever he's talking, it's like music is over it or something. Like it's him talking's not important until like really he doesn't get any like significant dialogue until towards when the film's more developed, I'll say. But
yes,
I think that was a really clever choice because it's like he is the center of the movie for reasons that become I think reasons that are clear throughout, really. But it's more about Gregory Peck's character like diving into this mystery about okay, who is this little baby that I've actually swapped my dead child for?
Yeah, and that was like kind of the interesting thing about it. I don't think it's too spoilery, but like again, by Damien not being prominent there, and again being a lot more silent, and I mean definitely he does have words, he talks and everything. It just makes him all the more eerie whatsoever, as opposed to something like we watched on the Babadook, where the child screaming or whatever. You know, it's supposed to be deemed as creepy, but I was just like more so annoying. But maybe that was the point of the film. As if you watch our Babadook review and you know the film and everything as what it's revealed later to be and everything, I felt like this was a better trade-off with Damien. And obviously we'll talk about his actor thing. I'm trying not to dive into it already, trying to stay in the Gregory Peck line just in case there's more to say. But yeah, he's given a vast array of emotions to convey in the film, and a lot of scenarios he has to react like his character would. But he's good. He's a good, solid, sound character to be a vehicle for this whole mess that's starting to become bigger and bigger as he comes to find out. So definitely, I mean, Gregory Peck is just the GOAT. He's good.
An insanely masculine, charismatic guy.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess going down to, you know what? Sure, why not? Let's talk about Damien since we've already started talking about him. Played by Harvey Stevens there. That kid,
Boy.
I don't know what it is. It's so bizarre because it's like if you look at him, he's right on the verge of being creepy, but not like overtly like that kid's Satan.
Right. They do that. I mean, I think they do that on purpose, and I think that's why they don't give him any dialogue, is because you don't like form an attachment or like sympathy with him. So you're kind of like a little bit in the dark about him, so you get to form your own opinion more or less based on what the film shows you. But they don't like give him like, oh yes, Daddy, let's play, you know, and they're playing or whatever, and then you know you're not like, oh, this is a cute little kid. They just kind of show him looking and not talking. He will react to things, but like the dialogue will often be overshadowed by music or sound effect or whatever. So like most of the film that you see him in, you're like, all right, you're like a little more detached than you would be from a typical child actor character, where they give them the scenes in the beginning that are like, oh, mommy, please love me. And then you're like, oh, this is a cute little kid or whatever. Like they don't give you those moments, so you get to just see him as like more of an object, I guess. This is Damien.
Yeah. It's so weird because they really don't spend a lot of time trying to attach you to the character. Now, granted, they're shown, both the parents are shown being like good parents and stuff, taking care of him, taking him out on outings, loving him, doing that, etc., and everything else like that. But at the same point, from an audience, there's like, I don't know if it's done intentionally or something like that, but it feels like there's just like something where you feel like you're never that close to Damien.
Right. He's like always in the scene, but he's never talking. It's never like that. People will talk about Damien, but like Damien's never has any like agency in the scene. He's never controlling what's happening or whatever. It's like they're out on a walk because, well, it's I'm a mother time. It's time to take him to the zoo or take him on the park or whatever. And it's always that. In that moment, it's about the wife, or in this moment, it's about the nanny, or in this moment, it's about the dad or whatever. And then Damien's there. He's like always there.
Yes.
But he's never like, the camera's never like pointed directly at him. Often, even like a lot of the shots where they show him, it's like he's around other people or he's behind somebody's coat or whatever. He's constantly there, but just not like controlling the attention,
Yeah, which I think is definitely an interesting choice, because I feel like a lot more films would be a lot more on the head, like pretty much like, ooh, spooky child, ooh, doing that, but they don't, and I think that ends up making the film a lot stronger, because it's all about uncertainty whenever all these omens start to appear and everything. But again, even whenever signs do become more clear about like what the trajectory of the film is going on, you're still never in a position of like, I know exactly that. You start to slowly gain the pieces. So, and whenever it comes to child acting, I feel like, I wouldn't say I was like blown away by his performance, but I think, in all honesty, the underacting honestly kind of works out better.
No, I think he did fantastic for what he was given. I don't think they wanted him to like be child star, like, oh, did I do that or whatever, right on camera. I do think they didn't give him a lot to like reach out and grab the audience's heart, but in that way, I mean, he did a fantastic job of something that's really challenging for, I presume, a 5-year-old actor, and that's to be, look sinister as a child.
Yeah, and it works out perfectly, dude. Yeah, so I'm definitely very happy with the way that came out. Again, unfortunately, can't talk too much about it without referring to specific scenes, which is obviously gonna spoil some stuff there. So overall, Damien, yes, definitely lives up to the reason of why he's memorable there. Talking about Catherine Thorne, which is the wife of Robert Thorne, played by Lee Remick, I feel like she does a very good job, and she's definitely given a couple of powerful scenes whenever it comes to her character's development and everything, because she easily could have been just like, again, as we've seen with a lot older films, just sort of like side wife essentially.
Yeah, and I think there's actually there's a little bit of that, but over they do give her some stuff.
Yes,
what I mean?
No, trust me, they're not scot free. This
Right.
is no Ellen Ripley or anything from Alien. And that was kind of the interesting thing, because I thought, at the beginning we see her and she's just kind of there more so supporting Gregory Peck's character than anything else. But there comes like a moment whenever it just starts to slowly change and shift. And then her whole character is having sort of her own dilemma pop up about the fact of feeling very different feelings overall. And so seeing that explored and everything, and adding further turmoil to Gregory Peck's character was actually pretty interesting and well done, because I honestly, it's so bad that the bar is set so low on how much like a female lead development I would get in this sort of film there. And so it's just like, yay, development.
Women mentioned.
Woo.
Go 70s films.
I know. Look at you, Richard Donner. Blazing the trail. But I feel like overall her actress did well. It did very well. I believed her. Not given too much, but again, does the job perfectly well and everything. And definitely the one scene I'll talk about briefly without spoiling stuff is my favorite moment was her just standing out by the window and staring out whenever she has that serious conversation and request with him. That part to me sticks out a lot, because it also is just a turning point for her beliefs as well as Gregory Peck's character. So we'll talk more about that later there. One of the other characters to pop up that I do have to give mention to is Father Brennan, played by Patrick Troughton, who's the priest that ends up coming up to Robert Thorne and basically telling him, hey, I got some news. you need to start repenting, boy.
Start slurping the blood of Christ.
Yes, eat the body, eat the body,
eat his body.
Yes, doing that, and I wish I could talk more about it. But I have to really like glaze over like the finer details of it. But that performance stuck out to me as super memorable.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I always like sort of like the doomsday people, you know, like Crazy Ralph and everything.
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for stuff like that because they are basically manic and sort of kind of unhinged. I always like those characters. Just because, again, it's like part of the joke where it's like, you know, oh, they're right, but because they're crazy, nobody really believes them. But again, the way they present him in the film as well as Robert Thorne as a character, it's actually done a little fairly well and stuff. Instead of being entirely dismissive, he's just like, okay, yeah, fine, I'll hear you out a little bit.
And he's like a tasteful crazy. I like the way he performs it, because he's not just literally like eyes white, babbling in the street like doomsday's coming, you know, like one of those people, like Crazy Ralph, you know.
Yeah.
He's more like, you could tell there's a couple screws loose, but like he like at first glance appears normal enough that you'd be like, yeah, what's up, dude? And then he starts talking and you're like, oh, I need to slurp the blood of Christ. Is that right? Well, we'll make this appointment at a later date, maybe.
I don't quite feel like it. And I think you do make that sound right, in the fact that he is sort of the doomsday foreteller, but he's not completely unhinged. He's definitely like a little raving mad, but you see he's very based and very stressed and worried, as opposed to like the people that say stuff, but then they'll literally like start screaming at a stop sign or something like that.
Right.
Definitely not that level of crazy, but I loved his performance, and so I have to give major kudos to Patrick Troughton for that. Definitely is pretty memorable, for good reasons, maybe a couple bad reasons, but mostly good reasons that we'll talk about. But yeah, I enjoyed his character thoroughly there. The other two characters end up appearing a little bit later, but they play such a major part that I feel remiss if we don't mention them briefly there. One of the peoples is the photographer named Jennings, played by David Warner.
He's kind of throughout the movie. He's just like in the beginning, and he's not that important, but you see him over and over.
Yeah, but like, and it's like very interesting because whenever he starts popping up at the beginning, like they really made a point to focus on him, and you're like, okay, that's weird. I wonder if this will come in later. And it's like more's revealed about him, but overall, that being said, I like what his character becomes later on in the film there, because for the most part, he's literally just a dude that's having to follow Robert Thorne around because, again, he's a political figure. He's a photographer trying to take photos of an important political figure.
Right.
So that way he can make a living and stuff. So I kind of like how they end up making that connection there, and how a lot of his photos start to aid in the plot later on. Obviously, won't mention too much about it, but I thoroughly enjoyed his character and everything, and sort of the conflict he caused with Robert Thorne whenever it came to Robert Thorne's suspicions and everything. Definitely a good sort of yin-yang sort of comparison to bounce off one another there.
Right.
And finally, one of them, it's so weird to describe. It's unsettling at times, but there's not a lot of evidence to show why it's unsettling, which again, I think compliments it greatly. But Miss Baylock Miss Baylock, played by Billy Whitelaw. She ends up appearing later to the estate to help out being a nanny and everything for the Thorne family. And just right from the beginning, there's just something off. I think there is something off.
Yeah, what's beautiful about her, but not only her, but also the photographer, the priest, all these sort of reoccurring, like, side characters almost, is all of them are introduced in the sort of mystery atmosphere where you don't really know what their motivation is until it becomes clear later. So I love her because there's something like off with her, but then there's also something off with the photographer and the priest. And so you never really know, like, okay, what, and they all come to some point of conflict, but you don't know what side of history they're landing on.
Yeah, and so a lot of the main characters are fairly strong. Like, even the other characters that have less screen time and less to do, I mean, they do perfectly fine. Everybody gives a strong, good, solid performance
I
there.
really like Ms. Baylock. She's just like, the whole time you're like, what are your intentions?
Yeah, because it's not even like, she's like doing anything that's like clearly like, okay, you're bad news. And so you're thinking like, okay, is it just me, or what is the underlying thing there?
Right.
But as the story continues on, you start to see where the lines in the sand are drawn,
Right.
essentially. And so I think it definitely makes it interesting, because yeah, this is it's an interesting thing, because I probably won't mention any of the other characters. I'll kind of dive more into sort of the pacing of the plot. It's not a very fast moving film,
No.
but it also doesn't feel like it takes its time either. It still keeps a steady pace there, because there's definitely sometimes with films, like, as much as I love them, they really just focus on the slow burn. Like, they just want you to take it in.
Right.
But I think maybe it also helps that, if they do take their time, the cinematography is great, and I especially love that they went to these specific locations to shoot.
Yeah.
Like, just beautiful landscapes there, beautiful architecture, just it's a pretty film to look at. And even there's a lot of times where I'm like, man, that framing's really good.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's like, as we've kind of talked about in films like Onibaba and such, like, if the cinematography is good and nice to look at, and there's enough story on the bone to get us through, it could take a lot more time, because this film is like roughly under 2 hours, I think. I want to say it's like an hour and 56 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, it feels like a couple hours. Yeah, it's a slower burn.
Yes, hour 51. I was off by 5 minutes, but yeah. So it definitely feels like it's taken its time, but there wasn't ever a moment there I'm like, okay, like, come on, let's get to the next thing.
I do agree with you. I will say I differ a little bit. I think the beginning was paced really slowly because it hasn't quite given you enough to think about yet. I think slow burn films work whenever, like, in those quieter moments, your mind is racing with, like, okay, well, what about this? What is? Where are they going? Why are they doing? Whenever you can fill in sort of the blanks with your own head because the movie's given that to you. I feel like up until the first, like, pivotal significant scene, which I think everybody will know which one I'm talking about if you've seen the movie. You don't really have a lot to think about. You're like, yeah, okay, because, like, the first scene is like adopting the weird baby or whatever, and then it's just like baby development for a while, and it kind of drags on.
I just remembered that. Oh my!
So I think the first, like, it's like 15 minutes of the movie or something. It's just like, yeah, I get it. You guys are parents. Like, okay. And they do, and they sprinkle in little things, but it's like not up until the first, like, significant moment of the film. It's just like, all right, can we speed this up?
I mean, didn't you love that slideshow?
Yeah,
that sped things along really quickly.
They just had to take a bunch of pictures with this kid, and they love him.
Oh my god, that was so silly seeing that, just because it just felt so oddly placed there, and then they never do anything like that again the rest of the film. So that was funny. I just totally forgot about that until you mentioned it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen.
It's hard to remember because it's nothing happens really.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the bizarre things about the Omen, I feel like, is the fact that, it'll have a lot of these slow burn moments, but then randomly have something happen that ends up being just over the top goofy unintentionally.
Sometimes, yeah.
Or it's just so out of left field where you're just like, you're just laughing because you don't know what to comprehend there. And I feel like that's both a pro and a con for me.
Yeah.
It's a pro in the sense of I love over-the-top cheesy stuff like that. But for a film like this, it also just feels not appropriately placed.
Yeah, because definitely I feel like so. I mean, this is a very dramatic movie. I feel like the soundtrack's insanely dramatic at times, and even and it's like fine because it's a drama and it's a very dramatic subject, so you're like into it. But yeah, sometimes you get taken out of it when a stunt looks funny or like some special effects or something look off, and it's just like, well, that was it'll pull you out of it. I can't say too much, but I do think like all of those moments are still like unsettling because they don't fit, you know what I mean, with the rest of the movie. But
yeah, and so it just leaves me conflicted because I like it, but my critical self is like, that does not fit in the film. Like it's
yeah,
funny.
but it's like by design. I think. I mean, it's supposed to be jarring, and so that's why it's so different than some of the other tones of the film. But it's yeah, it's easy to take away what is supposed to be like unsettling and dramatic and kind of laugh at it. We laughed at most of these scenes.
Yeah, because I guess that's like my thing is like, if it's something like Friday the 13th, where it's not even true horror. It's just sort of like, slasher horror, which ends up kind of being over the top and stuff like that. But this film isn't really portrayed in that same sort of light. It's supposed to be a religious sort of horror film and everything. And so whenever the over the top scenes happen, I think it should be like, oh my goodness, this is brutal and terrifying there. But really it ended up being laughable, which, not gonna lie, if it comes to seeing something like truly disturbing or something laughable, I tend to favor the laughable than I do the truly disturbing, because I just get a lot more enjoyment and remember that more, as opposed to the disturbing scenes where I'm like, I don't want to think about it. Like, it's not even like an enjoyable, like, oh man, it's crazy, you see this thing. Whereas this is just over the top craziness and everything. Like, oh man, I can't wait to talk about that stuff. There's definitely a lot to say. So I feel like I definitely feel conflicted there, which it is funny that this film comes from Richard Donner, who has done films like Lethal Weapon, which has a lot of comedy, as well as The Goonies there. So which I don't know. They're, again, as we mentioned with the film Get Out and everything, there's definitely an odd line that blurs between comedy and horror, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like when you kind of blend the two together, it's it benefits both if you do it masterfully. You know what I mean? The comedy is enhanced by the fact that it's alleviating the drama, and the drama is enhanced by the fact that you get to go before you go
Yes. That being said, this film is not usually played for laughs.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the comedy is intentional.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, just because, again, looking at Richard Donner's film work and everything.
I would say it's very similar to The Exorcist. A lot of the scenes that are disturbing in The Exorcist are also really funny. It's like you kind of get both. So it's I would say it's honestly similar in some respects.
Yeah, definitely so. We've talked about the music a lot, which was composed by Jerry Goldsmith. And the one theme I was telling you about, I am glad they did not overly use that theme. Right. They used it at the beginning and the end. And they would have sort of similar sort of, I can't think of the musical term, but basically callbacks to that theme, but it was very underlying. I did love the music for this film. It really helped set the mood and swing of everything there. So definitely one of those things where I'm like, yep, I see why everybody remembers the music from the Omen, essentially.
It's also in your face, you know what I mean? Obviously they have background kind of tracks too as well, but a lot of the times when the music people think of is the one that's it's blaring, it's blasting.
Yes, the audio mixing is definitely favoring the music in this film, where there's just really throwing it in just to really hammer in that vibe overall there. But definitely I felt like it was masterfully placed still. It definitely not in your face a lot of times there, because there's definitely some films where they're like, yeah, we have this good theme going on and everything, but then you're just like, okay, can we come up with something else, different music to spice things up? But yeah, so definitely major kudos to that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to mention. I would say production wise, really good, really good. There's definitely some times where there was one scene that unfortunately I got pulled out of, because basically whenever they're traveling around or whatever, there's one scene that I'm like, this looks like a movie set that they're on, that they just build out something, which again isn't inherently bad or anything, but sometimes whenever it throws me out of the film and stuff, I just end up being like, oh yeah, I'm watching a movie.
There are definitely some scenes. There's even a part where they show a plane and you can see the wires, and there's definitely some dated special effects.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like it's not super harmful there, but there was definitely just a few where I was like, okay, that some practical effects and sets look great, other ones not so
Right,
much
right.
there.
But none of them are so bad that it like takes you out of the movie.
Yeah.
Like significantly anyway.
Aside from that, was there anything else you want to comment on stuff you liked, disliked before diving into spoilers?
I will say I'd be like, this is one of those movies that I think if I rewatched it, I'd probably pick up on a lot more symbolism. Like I pick up on some of it now, but like knowing kind of where it's going would probably help. Like there's things that just even since we started talking, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what this was like. Foreshadowing, omening, you know what I mean? Like that's why they did this or whatever. So, I mean, I'd be interested at when we have our spoiler conversation to see how much of that comes out. But I do think this one is sort of laced with that sort of, which a lot of religious movies in general, not just religious horror movies, are sort of laced with. Because I mean, interpreting the Bible and the texts are full of all these symbols and things. So, yeah, it's now that I've seen the conclusion and I'm thinking back to some scenes, I'm like, oh, well, I like how I get that. Okay,
yeah. The only thing I'll add to that is the fact that with a lot of symbolism there and everything else, another thing I do have to compliment it, which again I guess goes back to setting overall, is the fact that they take advantage of, okay, this is a religious horror that we're doing, you know, we're going to make sure we show churches, crosses, Bibles. Like they definitely make sure, as opposed to just kind of being like, oh, let's just only use this once, because there's definitely some scenes they use for their advantage that creates a lot of strong sort of vibes for the scene, essentially. So I do have to give major kudos, whether it's like seeing a church and the stained glass windows or cemeteries outside.
Yeah, there's one.
Or lots of crucifixes there.
One cemetery in particular that was like, this is a cool setting.
Yes, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree
Lord
with
of the
that.
Rings shit.
Dude, that I know which one you're talking about. So yeah, I guess we're going to end up talking about spoilers here in a little bit. So first, let's give the rating.
The rating. Yeah, hey, so, I mean, we've kind of talked about all the things I like and dislike already, but I give a little summary for you guys anyway. I mean, acting, pretty great. Music, I feel like great, but like a little over dramatic. There are things that I feel like about this movie that, even though they are benefits to me, like I think the slow burn benefits the movie, I also think in parts it's unnecessary. Like in the beginning, you can still be interesting while showing, yes, these are parents that developed a relationship with their child, and also we have to wait a little bit before we show you something crazy so we can build the suspense. I feel like there are more productive ways to do that than this movie does, but that's a minor criticism because everything past that first 15 minutes works. I just feel like that first 15 minutes I was like, I'm gonna fall asleep. I don't know, there's just and then the music, it's great, but I feel like at times it's like it's still a little bit much, you know what I mean? So I feel that way about a lot of things about this film. So just the fact that I think in some respects even the good things they're doing is too much kind of bumps it down for me to like a 7 out of 10. I still think it's a really good movie. I think there's a lot of great stuff to uncover there. I just think there are some things that you do have to like get past a little bit, and because of that, it's a 7 out of 10 for me.
Okay, yeah, I think that's totally fair and just and everything. This film for me, this hits home for me, and it was one of those things where at the beginning and kind of middle, I was like, man, this is kind of shaping up to maybe be my favorite religious horror film so far. I really like it a ton and everything. I feel like whenever you get to the last third and everything, there's definitely a lot of moments that I felt like they could have taken and just really make it, I don't know, like they made it overly dramatic in some areas and underly dramatic in others. And I feel like you needed to move those levels up differently there, like tone this down, raise this up and everything. By the time I got to the end of the film, I was a little bit deflated a bit. I still thought it was a good ending there. I just felt like I wish they would have rewritten it differently or shot it differently or done something else there. But if I'm being honest, probably the best religious horror I've seen on this podcast is probably Rosemary's Baby.
Oh,
yeah. I feel like, I consider it religious horror given the context and everything, but I think I like that one a little bit more than this one, just as a whole or whatever. But I still like this film a ton. I'm gonna rate it like 7.5 out of 10. Like, if I had to round up or down, I'd probably be more likely to go to an 8 than I would to go down to a 7, because there's just definitely a lot of stuff I would like. Granted, maybe on the rewatch, you know, since I know all of the surprises in a film, maybe it'll be lessened by that. I don't know, but overall, yeah, I think 7.5 is pretty reasonable for my half. I really enjoyed this film a ton and definitely glad I watched it. I guess it's just a little unfortunate that by the time you get to the end of the film there, I don't think it necessarily loses steam per se, but definitely just starts to show a little bit more of like, I kind of wish maybe you would have done something different there, but it's, you know, still good overall, and definitely happy I watched it, and definitely a worthwhile recommendation on my behalf anyhow. And it is streaming on Hulu right now, granted, with the streaming services. I don't know how long it'll be on Hulu or whatever. But if you want to watch some good old religious horror film and haven't seen that one yet, you definitely could do much worse than that. It's a pretty solid pick on my part.
Pretty solid pick.
Pretty solid pick.
Sorry, what was the number you gave it again?
7.5.
7.5.
Yeah.
The points are coming out today.
Yes, yeah. You know, and if the points don't matter, just round that sucker up to an 8. That's fine. Aside from that, definitely is now the time to duck out if you don't want to get spoiled, because there's definitely a lot to spoil with this film there. Yeah. And as always, I will give Aaron the courtesy and pleasure of spoiling the first spoiler.
Well, I suppose we should start with the first big whoa movie moment. That's it's all for you, Damien.
Oh man,
it's all for you.
Yes. God, yeah, that scene, which I guess the actress's name was Holly Palance. That it's funny because whenever that scene happens, whenever she basically jumps off a roof to hang herself there, you're like, oh, that's where it's from.
I was like,
you know?
oh yeah, I know this scene.
Yeah,
and, like, what scene are you talking about?
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, I've just seen that on like a, like YouTube will clip up and it'd be like, The Shining, part 1 to 3, and it has like a 2-minute clip from it that's an important way. I've seen that from the Omen, and I was like, oh, that's where, okay, I've seen this scene before. Like, just that scene with no context. Yeah,
and it honestly comes out of left field, but at the same point, I feel like it works, because the only context that we're given that, okay, something's going on is the fact that this, I don't know what kind of dog it is. Like,
it's like a Doberman, right? Or Rottweiler. It's Rottweiler.
Yes.
It's a Rottie, yeah.
Yeah, and, she's, like, holding on to Damien or whatever, and ends up, like, staring at this dog, and there's, like, this high-pitched music going on there, and it seems like she's kind of, like, smiling at the dog or something before the dog wanders off, and then it's like nothing's going on for a while, then literally, like, we hear her screaming, Damien, this is for you, and she just jumps off the roof to hang herself. And not only
the window.
Yeah, she crashed through the window. That was the other thing as well. Like, I didn't expect to crash through the window, but that was definitely jarring, where I'm like, oh Jesus, you know. And, it is like sort of over the top where you start to laugh a little bit, but at the same point, I felt like that scene was done well.
Yeah.
It's just the crashing through the window, the abrupt, like, oh, she's just going to hang herself.
Yeah.
Again, that's where it plays on the, it's kind of over the top and you kind of laugh at it, but it also just fits it perfectly.
Right. It needs to be extreme like that, but then also, like, kind of explainable at the end. They're like, oh, well, that's bizarre, but it's not like Damien, like, no one's suspecting that the child had anything to do with that at the moment. But every time you go further, something more crazy and dramatic happens, and you're like, this kid. Kid,
Definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
I know. I was just saying, I love that scene now in retrospect, understanding the context of it, because there's so many things that I'm like, oh, I see now. Like, for example, I think it's really important that all this happens on his 5th birthday. Because they're they're having a birthday party. He's 5 this whole time, and then the remaining events of the movie happen over the course of like a year until he turns 6.
Oh my God!
You know what I mean?
Oh my god.
Which I didn't really piece together until we like started talking about this. I was like, yeah, that birthday party, that's his fifth. That's got to be his fifth birthday, and it all happens until he's 6. It's accumulating on to June 6th or whatever.
Yeah, that I should have known that, but somehow that fact skipped over me with how much they love sixes in this film. And the thing is, I'm guessing that because, like, I guess now that we could talk about it, because this is a thing where I'm like trying to look for a definitive answer. I'm guessing she hangs herself as a sacrifice to Satan because Damien is supposedly the like Antichrist, the son of Satan.
Well, he like Satan or the Satan powers that be or whatever you want to say it, because Damien's the son of Satan that you find out. The Rottweilers are like either watching over him or at his command or something. They are definitely agents of Satan, as you see later as with the Rottweilers in the graveyard scene and all that. And the fact that his mother was a Rottweiler, right? Because they uncover the grave of the mother and it's a dog. Yeah.
I'm so stupid. I didn't catch on to that.
Yeah, it was an animal carcass in there, and it was a dog, and then there's all the Rottweilers in the graveyard or whatever. Like, he was born. It's a bad omen that this kid was born the mother of a dog or whatever.
Oh my god! See, my brain just filled in the own blanks. Like the mother was still alive, and they just put a dead dog in the grave.
Yeah, like if it's not super clear in the beginning, but like there are several times where somebody, like the pastor mostly, is trying to, before he dies and gets speared, which we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure, is trying to say his mother is and then he gets like interrupted or whatever. But I think at one point he says his mother's a bitch or something, but he means like
quite
a dog.
Literally.
Yeah. His mother was a Rottweiler.
That does make sense. I thought he was just going to say like a Satanist or whatever.
Right. You're wondering through the film, like, what do you mean his mother was what? And so that's where, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later whenever they go to the graveyard. And finally, that's the secret he uncovers or whatever. He's like, what do you like, this dog? Anyway, so that's...
Boy, I feel silly.
Right. So he has some connection with these dogs that are obviously like agents of the evil or whatever. And so I think either he or the dog or whatever kind of like puts the idea in this otherwise normal babysitter's mind to go kill herself because they need to make room for Mrs. Baylock to come in or whatever.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yes,
they're like, it's time to raise the son of Satan now, so we got to get an agent of Satan in here.
Yeah, so literally just sort of
prior to this incident, there was nothing wrong with this babysitter, I don't think. It was just like, he was like, all right, now kill yourself. We got to get a real woman in here.
Yeah, we need to start setting the pieces.
Right.
Essentially. Yes, that does make sense. And I feel very silly that somehow, and here I thought that it was just a human that gave birth, not a dog.
Yeah, well, it's weird. And, like, a lot of even the stuff they give you is not, like, made explicitly clear, you know what I mean? They just kind of give you enough context. But, like, yeah, that's one of those things that even after it happened, I was like, okay, what does this mean? Until I really thought about it. But
yeah. And the use of the Rottweilers in this film is very disturbing. Like, very disturbing. There's a lot of times whenever they try to make dogs scary or whatever, and obviously I've not seen Red Cujo, but I'm sure the movie's scary, so I'm sure if they really wanted to, they could. But a lot of times they make dogs like a menace, but it's mostly more in action movies where I'm just like kind of numb to it.
Right.
So just being kind of genuinely afraid of the dog anytime it was there, and everything else just unnerving or whatever, I was like, yeah, that's some good use of animals in film.
Well, they do a great job of, like, most of the time you see them, they're in the dark, and it's a black dog, you know what I mean? So you just see its like eyes and its teeth or whatever, and they stumble upon it, and then it's growling at you. I mean, dogs are dangerous, man.
Yeah. So definitely good use out of that there. But yeah, of course that scene was definitely disturbing. Another scene that you did mention is about the priest demise there by being impaled. That one, I wouldn't have minded it if it didn't feel so silly.
It was a little silly, yeah. And it's also slightly confusing to me because, like, the elements that kill him, I think, are typically associated with God and not necessarily Satan. So it's hard to tell, like you assume he dies from Damien because he's been cursed or whatever, and he's trying to kill this devil child or whatever, and after he finally gets his truth out, this monstrous storm whips up, and he runs and he tries to take cover in the church, and he can't get in because it's locked. And then the top of the church gets lopped off, and it forms a spear that kills him or whatever. Yeah, that part was confusing to me because it was like this nature thing is typically associated with like godlike powers, but I guess it's like Satan-like powers.
Well,
too.
and it's weird if you think about it. It really is, because like throughout all the deaths in the film there, it's hard to know like really what's at play, because like you know, you see the nanny look at the dog and you're thinking, okay, the dog is an agent of Satan, tells her kill yourself, and it's like, okay. And then there's the second death, the priest, where as this is discovered later, he has a birthmark of 666 on there, so that further makes it question whether it's Satan that killed it or God that killed it, because it's like supernatural stuff going on, and he's also riddled with cancer. Yeah. So literally, and he's literally saying, "I'm trying to repent for what I've done."
Yeah.
There.
And that part of the movie confused me a little bit because I couldn't tell. I was like, is this supposed to be like the priest from the beginning that gave the child to him in the first place or whatever? But no, he does say he witnessed the birth, he witnessed the mother or whatever, and as it's revealed later, the guy that actually gave him the baby both have like 666 marks or whatever they are. Yeah, so supposed to be agents of Satan. But...
Yeah, so were they agents of Satan, and then this priest just decided to repent?
I think this one, I think he felt bad about what he did. He knew that Damon was, that's how he knew all this shit or whatever, and about the plot to replace his baby with this devil child for him to raise or whatever, because he needed to be the son of a politician or whatever. Yeah, and so I think he felt bad, and that's why he lived in like that room that was covered in literally pages of the Bible and then crucifixes everywhere with a view of the church or whatever. Yeah, it's because he was trying to keep something out from killing him, and I mean I think he was using religious symbols and things to save him, but I do wonder if it was God that killed him in that moment. You would assume it's Damien because the photographs show that he's gonna die this way or whatever.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it has such a cool lead up, because like he's requested to meet with Robert Thorne to be like, look, your whole lives are in danger, and this kid Damien is going to cause the apocalypse essentially there. And whenever, you know, Robert Thorne's like, yeah, whatever, and just goes off. Whenever he's heading home, like in the park, there's definitely some really artistic shots. The wind is going full blast and everything. The storm's doing that. Even like lightning is trying to strike this dude. And as he's running to church for sanctuary and everything, you know, it's like this great build up as he's just trying to run from this supernatural force or, you know, anything like that. And then as soon as lightning strikes the like little like, I don't know, steeple sort of like pointy thing as it's falling down, and him just standing in one place going, no. Right. Like I was like, oh come on, dude.
Goofy. I can tell that this was taken from like a book, because there's a lot of things that I'm like, yeah, like this is super well written, the plot, everything, all the details, the way they condensed it, but then like, yeah, you're like, you could tell this was a dramatic scene written out in the book that they just had to adapt to film, and they were like, how do we make him just stand there until the steeple stabs him? Like,
yeah, I guess just like fear by like paralyzed with fear, that's about the only thing I could come up with, but it just ends up being a lot more laughable.
It just does look cheesy sometimes when you see it played out.
And that's kind of the bad thing with some of the deaths. Like some of the deaths, you know, verge on being cheesy but work, but then other ones work on just being cheesy, and I think that's one of the ones. Another one is whenever Catherine Thorne is basically, I guess I'll add context to it before, but she basically confronts Robert as being like, I don't want to have another child, because she's basically growing to hate Damien, because she's like, I feel like he's not my kid. I don't know who he is anymore. And now I've learned that I'm pregnant, and I don't want to be a mother of any more kids. You know, I want an abortion and everything. And I feel like that's definitely a very powerful scene there, because it works on a multitude of levels. But, you know, to be fair, while I feel like she delivers it perfectly, it more so adds sort of the conflict to Robert Thorne, because he's like, I've made my wife basically hate children because of something I thought I was doing good for.
Right.
And now it's just falling apart because obviously he never told her that. And that's kind of the interesting thing. He never tells her that Damien is not her child.
Yeah. He never does that, which is bad on his part.
Yes, very bad. And you understand it, but whenever it gets to a certain point in the film, it's like, Robert, you gotta...
Robert, baby,
Yeah.
this is your fault.
Yeah, you gotta add to it there, but
Yeah.
that sort of like turmoil she has to where she grows to hate Damien, essentially, there.
That scene's also really important too, because it's the first time the audience gets to like pretty much 100% believe the priest, because he is kind of crazy, and you kind of believe him because you're watching a movie called The Omen and with a child named Damien. Like as the audience, you're like sure, but that's right before that scene. He was like, "Your wife's pregnant," and he's like, "No, she's not." Like, and then he comes home, and she's like, "I have a kid and I want an abortion."
Yeah.
So it's like, how did he know? You know what I mean? Unless he really is giving solid, like, informed information to this dude.
And that's kind of the interesting thing, because it's set up as a mystery, and you think it's going to be like, oh, is Damien actually the son of the devil or whatever? But by that point, I was like, yeah, it's the son of the devil.
The mystery then becomes like, are they going to kill this child before it kills all of them?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, definitely. So it's definitely not like a Rosemary's Baby situation where it's like, is this all in her head, or is this all actually going on, essentially? Definitely different sort of thing, which I was kind of surprised by. I definitely thought it was going to be more of like the questioning, like, is this kid the son of Satan? But by that point, you just believe it. And there's definitely some motifs, like literally whenever Miss Baylock walks in, it says like, I am ready to serve you, and Damien's like right in front of the fireplace, so the flicking flames are behind him.
Well, I was concerned because the way she's presented, I was like, is this like a weird church lady that's like gonna try to kill this kid?
Oh, that would have
the son of Satan. Like, because she was like, I want to be alone with him, and like blah blah. And I was like, oh, like this is like weird. What's her deal? And we've only seen like weird religious people up until that point. So I was like, I thought she was like a nun from the nunnery that was gonna go like just try to kill this kid or whatever. And then they're gonna be like, okay, now what the fuck's happening with our child? Why are people trying to kill him? Yeah. And that was kind of where the story was gonna go. But then well, I mean, once she was in there and then the dog appeared, I was like, oh yeah, she's like a witch. And her last name's Baylock. It's like a mixture of like Fae and Warlock anyways.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even think of that there. I love that she's like, the agency sent me.
Yeah. Well, first, Gregory Peck is just so trusting. And she's like, yeah, I'm your new nanny. Like, can I go see the child? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, alone. And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And then she walks off, and then the wife is like, well, she seems nice. Like, I'm glad you picked her. And he's like, what do you mean I picked her? I thought you picked her. And then they run up, and they're like, who the fuck are you? And she's like, oh, the agency. And they're like, oh, the agency. Well, it's just the agency thing. She's like, here's my reference. It's great. And then walks off. Like, well, that's all we needed to hear, is that it was the agency.
Yeah, definitely a surprise there. But yeah, whenever it comes to like the over time thing there, showing sort of like the hatred that Catherine is building up for Damien there, it definitely helps add a bit of conflict, but it does lead to another, like, I call it a death scene, because technically someone died whenever she's trying to water the plant. And that scene, it's like shot beautifully, but also it's so cheesy the way it's set up, like a Looney Tunes cartoon.
It is Looney Tunes as fuck.
Yes, because basically Damien is circling around in a tricycle, and Miss Faylock is just staring there, like smiling there, essentially. Meanwhile, like, oh, I need to water the plant here. Let me set this up, set the bowl of fish there, doing that, and Damien's going,
Picking up speed.
Yeah, and then he just.
And then, Miss Baylock just opens the door and smiles.
And he's just like, just pedaling down, and it just able to ram into the stool there. And, which I do love, they have established these shots of that stairwell in the earlier part of the film, so you know what the layout looks like there. I did like the scene, though, even though it's like a mix. Like, I think this is such a good, dramatic, good idea scene, but it's also shot in a way where it just looks silly as hell.
Yeah.
And so, like, she's hanging on the banister rails, essentially, like, slipping off. She's like, Damien. And, Damien's just like, staring at him, blank expression there.
Mhm.
As she slips, it's like the way she falls.
It's real goofy.
Yeah, and then ends up literally in Family Guy pose, like falling over essentially.
With a little drip of blood coming out of the corner of her mouth. Like,
Yeah, and I just thought like, oh Jesus, she's dead, or
Right.
and it's like no, she just broke a lot of bones and she lost a child.
Right.
There, and she's basically bound to this hospital there, and I'm like, man, imagine if that fall was any sillier. Well, I don't have to,
because it happens.
because whenever a lot of traveling is going on Gregory Peck's behalf, that's whenever bad stuff happens with her. Which I guess I should talk more about the photographer and Gregory Peck kind of teaming up there, because at first it sort of feels kind of unnatural there.
Stormy. Well, I just heard
a bad
thunder.
omen. A bad omen. It's one of those things that whenever it pops up and everything else, it's sort of like one of those things where I'm like, this feels too much like coincidence, because they put a lot of emphasis on this photographer, but they don't say why. You know, because like literally there's one scene where he accidentally knocks the film out of his hand, and he's like, I am so sorry, please send the bill to my estate. He's like, just say you owe me a favor, you know, and goes off. And you're focusing on this guy, and I genuinely thought the photographer was like one of the Satanists there, like he's getting reconnaissance.
Yeah, because they kind of make him his motives unclear, like intentionally, I think.
But he ends up contacting him, Gregory Peck, that is, whenever he's like, hey, can I talk to you real quick about some of the photos I'm taking around you? And it's like, so yeah, there's this photo where, and I do like the photography showing sort of the lines and deaths kind of becoming more pronounced, because like, hey, you see the nanny here? That line trajectory is like the same line trajectory as it was whenever she got herself hung there.
Right.
And then the priest ends up having like this very odd diagonal line pointing towards him. And the one that was taken close to the day of his death is more profound and everything. And you're thinking like, okay, I guess he's just sort of mentioning it there because he's having a lot of issues. Come to find out that he's like, yeah, so whenever I went to the place and I accidentally took a picture of myself in the mirror, I saw that big black line going across my head. I need your help with this.
Right.
Like, you know, this involves you. We need to figure this out. And I kind of like it. I kind of like that it becomes sort of like a traveling across the countryside trying to stop Satan sort of thing.
Right, before you both die. Because I do think it's important that, yeah, like the first kill of somebody that's trying to stop Satan or trying to stop Damien or whatever is the priest or whatever, and he lays out with his like omens or whatever right in the beginning and his mad ramblings what's gonna happen. He's like, yeah, Damon's gonna kill the unborn child because he doesn't want any competition. He's gonna kill your wife, and then whenever he's certain that all of your possessions are gonna go to him or whatever, he's gonna kill you. But then, yeah, that in that moment, the photographer's like, yeah, he's also going to kill me. So you have like 4 people that you're waiting to die, and that sort of ticks through the movie moments, because like, yeah, the unborn child dies when she pushes her off the cliff, and then the priest dies, and then she dies, the wife dies, and then the photographer dies, and then by the end of the movie, he dies too. So
yeah, definitely falling piece by piece, one by one
and
there.
Guess what? If you count the first nanny in there, that's 6 deaths, baby. 6. I'm telling you, this is one of those things where I'm like, yeah, when we talk about it, I'm sure a lot more symbols are going to pop up.
God dang it. I didn't even put that together. Oh my gosh. Anyways, yeah, so it's one of those things where I like it a ton, and I do like that you go visit the priest's room there. And I am curious about this and what you have to say about it, but you know, they go to the room, and I love this room, just how unhinged it is, with like Bible pages being plastered all over the walls and windows, with just a little slit to view the church outside that he's staying close by. But on the back of the door, he has 47 crucifixes.
Yeah.
The only thing I could think of is that 13 plus 47 equals 60.
Oh.
But I don't know. I mean, that's just me coming up with something.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I wondered if that number was significant. I wonder if that's like, because there's several Bible verses that they mention. I wonder if 47 is like, you know, one of the verses or something, one of the verse numbers. I'm not sure though. I have to give that a little look-see.
Yeah, definitely do that. But I loved seeing that room there. It's just, for me, ended up being really help setting the tone about this priest, especially there.
Because he's a kind of crazy nut job, and I love the way that they develop the priest and the fact that he's like full of cancer and injecting morphine in himself every day, multiple times. So that's kind of why he's like off his rocker, but also because he's been an agent of Satan and he's trying to repent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like multiple, like every single part of this movie could be explained with a real world explanation. You could leave this movie and be like, Damon's not actually the son of Satan. Like, these people died. This woman that was taking care of him was crazy. There was definitely a child swap, but like, there's no actual definitive proof that like, Damon's the son of Satan or whatever. But at the same time, overwhelming evidence. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think that's the nifty thing about it. You know, like Damien doesn't explicitly like start levitating, doing crazy powers, but there's definitely a lot of stuff to point that. Yeah, this kid's probably the son of Satan.
Right.
If we're being completely honest with ourselves. But yeah, so man, that rumbling is really ominous, dude.
I didn't even think it was gonna storm.
No, me neither.
Checked the weather earlier today.
Yeah, but I do love that they end up taking like a trip back to Rome, which is where they adopted the kid or whatever. And that's whenever they made more allusion to 666 essentially there, because the photographer's like, I looked up the papers and stuff, your kiddo was born in June on the 6th hour.
And he's like, it's 6 a.m.
Like I think your kid's the son of Satan, which is like the only way this film works is if someone else has a firm belief in that as well. So I like whenever they go to Rome and they're like, oh, the orphanage burned down. There's no record evidence or anything like that. The priest is still alive, but you got to go all the way out there and then come to find out that basically he was punished almost because like his injuries he sustained is similar to those that I guess defy Christ or something like that.
Like the left side of his body or whatever, his left arm and face or something.
Yeah, doing that, and then he's the one that kind of refers them to go to the graveyard where Damien's mother is buried there. And I'm guessing that this was also the priest that was also working there was in cahoots, which is why he was adamant like, I think it's a good idea if you take the child. Yep, you should.
Grab him, yes.
Because obviously it seems like a lot of people were working for that. And again, for all of them to burn, like the whole place down, no records, especially the like area where they were born. I'm like, okay, I'm guessing they were in cahoots. That's about the only way this works out there.
They all had the birthmark or whatever, because they mentioned that the crazy guy in the monastery has it too, because they're like, oh, he's renounced Christ and he's an agent of Satan or whatever. And he's like, how do you know? And he's like, well, he told us. And also he has this birthmark of 3 6s or whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking definitive proof there. But yeah, it was funny because like at the graveyard or whatever, I really like that set. Is that the one that you're saying it screams Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, it looks like some big fucking spiders are gonna crawl out of those mausoleums or something. I don't know. It's a spooky fantasy looking setting.
Yes, very much so. But I do love them revealing both the tomb of the mother and supposedly Damien's tomb, which obviously was not his.
Right.
But
it was the child that was born and died, and then the doctor said that it died, and so then he had to do the whole swap. Well, but I love that he sees that, he was murdered, is what they discover, is because his head was caved in or whatever.
Yeah, which is like so depressing, but honestly, I am glad that they at least did closure on that, because it's like, all we know is like, oh yeah, the child died during birth, but obviously no big evidence of that there aside from that, and I think I would have accepted it, like, oh yeah, the child died during birth. But no, the child was just killed, at birth there, and then just basically placed there along with Damien's mother, a dog.
A dog.
Yes, and then all the Rottweilers just popping out there, and I'm just like, yeah, this is an absolute nightmare for me.
Which is obviously like, they sort of represent like Servius, who's like the guardian of hell or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just these odd multiple dogs. They obviously couldn't just have a 3-headed dog there. But I mean, obviously these are like guarding... whatever the opposite of a holy place would be. It's an unholy place.
Yes, yes, exactly. I do like how they mentioned that, for everything holy, there's a counterpart of unholy account there, essentially. But yeah, it definitely was a tense scene where I was like, man, like I'm getting the horror vibes.
Yeah.
There, it didn't like while some scenes are over the top, silly stuff like that. That one I felt like was definitely less silly because I was definitely like, yeah, I'd be mortified if a bunch of Rottweilers came at
and
me.
they did a really good job of like, it's hard to shoot those scenes where it looks like dogs are tearing a dude apart. Because,
Yes.
because if you're using real dogs, you obviously don't want them to tear somebody apart.
Yes, no, but
there was a really funny. If you ever watch that scene again, there was a part where you could obviously see people like in the background, like looking, like I think like dogs' handlers or something.
Oh, I
like,
didn't
in the
see
bushes.
that.
There's like 3 little faces in the bushes, and I was like, what is this? It's when he's trying to climb over the fence.
Oh, I didn't even see that because the one I saw is whenever Gregory Peck is trying to climb over the fence, they didn't use real dogs; they used
puppets.
like puppets, like, and so then I kind of laughed at that a little bit there. But for the most part, the scene shot well. Although there's definitely some of the spikes on the fence that flop over as they're crawling over, because again, they don't want people to actually get hurt on the sets there. So again, there's definitely a lot of like weaker points there. But yeah, that cemetery was a mood.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like a
scene.
lot of moods are very well set there. And they try to do stuff like that. This is a callback to earlier, but whenever they're taking Damien to church, I do love that Miss Baylock is just like, I don't think a 5-year-old needs to go to like a wedding at a church. And then,
And it's literally her first day. They've known her for like 20 minutes. They're like, I'm going to keep Damien. We're going to take him to the park. And she's like, no. We told you to get my kid ready and put him in the car.
Yeah, and whenever he approaches the church, him freaking out, I felt like it was a good scene, but the execution was a little bit messy there, where I ended up just laughing.
Yeah, he like freaks out and like scratches up his mom and everything. He bruises her.
And I do like, this is just a small thing as I think about it there, I do like that after that scene, they're just like, yeah, that was really weird for Davey to freak out. And she's like, well, that's like, the first time we've ever noticed anything bad. Although now that I think about it, he's never gotten sick or anything. He's been a perfectly...
Well...
Jump scare on Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. Jesus.
Big thunderstorm. Yeah, we are under severe thunderstorm.
Yes. That scared the hell out of me. Anyways, as I resuscitate myself back to life, come to think of it, by the way, this is scary as hell talking about a religious horror film and lightning's literally striking outside. Definitely one of the most unnerving recordings we've done. But then again, The Exorcist was also cursed because I lost the opening to that one. So
True.
I guess this is the other cursed thing that adds
horror.
Yes, religious horror. That being said, come to think of it, Damien's never been sick from anything, which I do love that little hint there, especially as well.
Yeah, like or upset or anything. Like he's been a little,
He's been perfect.
No measles, no mumps.
But yeah, and I do like that after they figure out like, okay, this is for real. We need to, we're going to go back to the hotel. And while he's staying at the hotel, he calls Catherine just to be like, Catherine, you need to leave right now. I sent a guy to come pick you up, essentially there. You need to get out. And this is a scene that I hate once again, where she's like, again, she's having a hard time getting undressed because she has a huge freaking cast on her arm.
Full body cast.
And then, she's trying to get dressed. And then lo and behold, Miss Baylock is there just looking evil as all get out. And then she's like, no. And then she gets pushed out a window. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is... Because, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, how did they let... I guess, like, Miss Baylock is like, oh, I'm coming to see her or whatever. Because she just appears and pushes it out.
We're still going, I guess.
Yeah, we're still going. This is the most cursed episode. Jesus Christ. Fortunately, whatever is left, I guess, goddamn, the powers that be are trying to stop us.
I guess so.
Anyways, I just feel like, what are you doing here, Miss Baylock? And I know it's like the plan. It's like, oh, we got to kill the parents, so we protect the son of Satan there. But then pushing her out the window, and so you see her fall, and literally Looney Tunes effect where she literally falls through an ambulance head first, and then the ambulance door pops open to show her dead body there, and I'm just like, this is just a cartoon by this point.
It's one of those things that I feel like it was written out, you know what I mean? And they were like, yeah, okay, this is going to happen. And people are like, oh, that's going to be this, and then they had to figure out how to do it without it looking cheesy, and there's just not a way.
No, like, and that's a bad thing. Like, it's just so cheesy that, again, it just sort of sucks away the horror there, which, again, isn't necessarily a negative in my eyes, because at least it's funny and there's some value to it. It's just not the value I was prepared for, essentially, there. And that pretty much ends up being, like, the thing where he's like, yeah, we gotta stop Damien there. And whenever he goes to Jerusalem, they find that one guy, and he's like, hey, I need to talk to you about this alone. This is dependent on you, essentially. And so he basically talks to Gregory Peck, being like, here's all these knives. You have to stab him multiple times. The first stab only kills the body physically. You have to stab it multiple times there, essentially, in order to kill it.
In the shape of a cross, specifically.
Yes, doing that there. And as they're walking out, the thing that makes me a little like, oh, what, are you kidding me there? Is the fact that suddenly Gregory Peck is suddenly having reservations. He's like, oh, I can't kill the kid there at all.
I get it, though.
I
because
get
he's
it,
like,
but
this is a child that he's raised, even though he's now come to accept the fact that it's not his child, it's the son of Satan, and he needs to take care of him. It's also like, you can stab a child, stab a little baby, like, not just once, but multiple times with multiple knives.
Yes. I apologize for the oh my god.
That's hail, baby.
So yeah, you were mentioning, like, you believe Gregory Peck, would have reservations about having to kill his son Damien and everything.
I mean, because at the end of the day, it's still like, you have to stare down the barrel of a human child and stab him, like 10 times with ancient daggers on the altar of a church, which he's sure, while he's alive and screaming, like, anybody's gonna have trouble doing that, even though they're like, yeah, I can tell myself, this guy's Satan, and I'm cleansing the world of this evil. This kid killed my wife, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But still, I mean, would you have the balls to even knowing that? If I put a 5-year-old in front of you right now, much less a 5-year-old you've raised your whole life, but I would just put a 5-year-old boy and was like, hey, this guy's Satan, I need you to stab him 10 times, you'd be a little hesitant.
Yeah, for sure. Hesitancy would definitely pop up. I do love that the photographer is completely like, no,
right,
kill the kid.
It's not his kid.
Yes.
He's like, you fucking kill him, dude.
Yeah, and I do think it's so cheesy that Gregory Peck's like, no, I won't kill the kid, and he throws the knives in a direction, and then
they have to sound effect some shit in that does not sound like he just threw a bundle of knives. They're just like, clink.
Yes, and then he's like, well, fine, I will. And then he's going to pick up the knives one by one by this construction site. This dude in a car is just getting out, and he ends up like slipping out and causing the parking brakes to slip. And so as it's slowly making its trajectory down and everything, I was not prepared for the death that was to come. Because
pretty wild.
Because as he's picking up the knives one by one, the car stops, and it has some panes of glass stacked in the bed of the truck. And then there's an abrupt stop as it hits like a stop, and the glass launches across, decapitating him.
And they show the head just flying.
Yeah, and the head's rolling and flying as the pane of glass also shatters a store display window and everything. Like, it is probably, I don't know, it might be the most dramatic death, just with how much insane stuff happens there. And so then it's just like, well, yeah, I guess I gotta kill the kid.
Well, confronted with this new revelation.
Yeah, after seeing your head get cleanly cut off, I suppose I can kill the child.
I will stab my child.
Yeah, and so it's like, whenever he gets home and stuff, and he's like, I need to make sure that, he has the mark of, the beast essentially on there. Because that's the thing. He's like, this kid doesn't have 666 on there. So, maybe this is all just a mistake or something like that. And, the guy who gives him the knives, he's like, no, it has to be somewhere. Like, maybe the hair even.
Yeah.
And as he comes to find out, trimming back the hair sort of adds that suspense as you see a gnarly 666 birthmark on there.
Which I will say, this whole plot revolves around the fact that this baby was born with a head full of hair.
yes, beautiful head of hair, mind you. Beautiful coat.
Because they get him the day they were born, apparently, and I mean, he already has a bunch of hair, which some babies are born with hair, but enough to cloak a 666 birthmark on his head.
Yes, very dark hair there. And then it's at that point, Miss Baylock decides to take up the mantle and
Just
attack,
jump on his back.
which I do love that they set up that Damien is basically protected at this point because Damien has his Rottweiler, which Gregory Peck has to trick to locking up. And then Miss Baylock, because they literally whenever he goes to check on Damien or whatever, he's spooked by the dog just appearing there. He's like, whose dog is this? And she's like, oh, well, we found it and I brought it in. It's like, Miss Baylock, get that dog out of here.
Yeah. And then multiple times he has to be like, I thought I told you to get rid of this dog. And she's like, oh, they're coming in the morning or whatever.
Yeah, and also Miss Baylock is just clearly just turning this into like a fortress for Damien, essentially, because she's literally like, there's that one point, it's like, where's this worker? It's like, oh, she quit. I mean, you never know what happens to her.
Right, and they're like, you didn't leave a note or anything, and they're like, she sent a forwarding address and to send her last month's paycheck here or whatever. But she's like, don't worry, I could take care of Damon on my own.
But then Miss Baylock goes into full deranged psycho attack mode as she's like latching onto him.
That scene was so suspenseful because I know he like tiptoes up there. Miss Baylock's asleep in the other room. He like closes the door, and then goes to snip his hair. And I was like, I just know she's gonna, because they don't show the door for a long time. Yeah, she wakes up and opens the door and like attacks him. I'm just glad she just jumped on his back instead of like stabbing him or something, because I thought he was about to get stabbed.
Yeah, I thought he was about to get stabbed as well, but no, she's just like clawing and biting and everything like a feral animal there. And it's bad because like it's such a great suspense scene trying to get up there. You're just basically on pins and needles there. But then the whole fight between them just ends up being a little bit silly. Just, I mean, it just kind of reminded me of Friday the 13th whenever they have that big fight at the end of the first film where it's just literally them slamming into each other and everything. And so it did kind of suck away a little bit of the tensity. It wasn't too terrible. Definitely sort of like, oh my gosh, get this gal off me there. But it is going to be more silly. Like literally he's like biting his leg and he's like, you know, trying to shake it off.
She's biting him a lot. He just kind of like kicks her a few times.
Yeah. And as he's dragging like Damien out, they brawl once again in the kitchen there because they think she's out for a count, but no, she's back. And I guess like they're about to stab each other with some cuddlery there, and then I guess he kills her by stabbing her in the neck, I guess.
I think it looks like he stabbed her like twice, because she had the thing she was trying to stab him with, and he was holding her hand back and then grabbed like a screwdriver or something and like stabbed it in her neck, and that caused her to roll over, and then he stabbed her with the fork.
Oh, I didn't see that.
So she was like pronged.
Yeah.
And then he got out of there, but he's taken a toll. I mean, this was after he got stabbed through the arm when he was trying to get over the
that was brutal.
Because the Rottweilers were getting him, and so and his wound opens up, and so he's getting blood smeared all over the fridge and stuff while he's fighting this woman. And then Damon went on the way down after he knocks out the woman the first time, and he's going down the stairs. Damon like grabs the electric like lamp or whatever, and they get like shocked and tumble down the stairs. That's how like Damon passes out the first time. It's wild. And then Damon's like trying to fight him in the car ride while he's driving to the church to kill him.
I do love that they established the layout of the manor where he always has to go through like security and stuff, because obviously he's like a senator and stuff essentially. And whenever he's like initially driving away, he's like slamming on the brake there, just immediately just peeling out there. And the usual policeman is like, hello. He sees him zoom off. He's like, okay, that's fishy as fudge. I gotta investigate about that. And it just ends up being like a whole crazy scene whatsoever as he's zooming to the nearest church, and he drags Damien out as he has to sacrifice him on like the altar essentially there. And you know, for a scene describing like, oh, you must take him to the church and sacrifice him on an altar with knives in the side of the cross, I thought like the church was going to look a lot more dramatic or something, but it definitely looked a little more mundane.
Well,
there
still a beautiful
Catholic
for
cathedral. Sure. I guess compared, I got spoiled to cathedrals in this film. You know what I mean? Like that's a cool looking church there. Then you get to like the sanctuary there, and it's just like, okay, you know. But I do like the sort of like unnerving aspect there was as he's like trying to stab him first with the knife, and then Damien's like, "Please, Daddy, I love you."
Right, that's like the only line of dialogue you get to hear Damien say clearly. Like every other time he's like yelling because he's at the church, or he's talking to his mom, but it's overcut by the music or whatever. Like that's the only line of dialogue is when we, at the end where he tries to become sympathetic. He's like, "Please, Daddy."
Yes, which does definitely help out to it. I guess another addendum is that I've been spoiled to the amount of insanity this film has,
Yeah,
like especially the zoo ride safari.
Yeah.
Whenever like all of the baboons and stuff are
Start
like
attacking.
slapping the car,
Yeah.
like over the top stuff. So I guess that's why I was expecting some big dramatic church scene, like screaming Castlevania or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, and of course the policemen shoot Gregory Peck because he's literally about to stab a child in
He's
their
a
eyes,
holding over his kid. Yeah.
But it does. I wish we would have seen Gregory get shot at the very least there, because it does just like a slow-mo of the gun shooting at him as it fades to a cemetery.
Yeah.
I just felt like that was a little like, I get it, but at the same point I'm like,
Yeah, it wasn't super satisfying.
Yes, it wasn't satisfying. It wasn't awful, just wasn't completely satisfying. And then whenever you see like basically the two graves of the Thorne family there as they're giving it a proper burial, I love it. It's so silly. It's so silly, but I can't get enough of it. Where one people comes up and like, "Mr. President, we need to start leaving." It's like, in a moment, you know, and it's like both the president and the first lady holding hands with Damien. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And Damien just turns to the camera and gives a slow smile as the Omen theme starts playing. And I'm like, oh my God, this film. So definitely does a lot of goofy stuff. But again, I mean, it's one of those things where it's not a happy ending, but I'm okay with it.
Right. It's kind of like, well, Satan won. But there's also a little element, like not a huge one, but there's a little element of like, what if everyone was wrong?
Everybody, including the people like praise Satan.
There's just no actual proof besides the fact that they have a little 666 birthmarks. You know what I mean? Like, which is like that's really the only tangible thing they're going off of is like this kid is Satan because, but it's like animals don't like him, and you know, he likes to be by the fire, and he wasn't sick. That was really. If this was real life, I'd be like, you're gonna execute a child for this. Because a guy that's full of morphine told you to and then to go to the desert where some other guy gave you some ancient knives to stab him. Like, this is sounding a little off. Like, if this was real life, which is an element of that, because it's like, oh my God, you know, what if this did happen in real life? And then Satan's the president's kid. Well, you know, I guess the world's doomed.
Yeah. That sounds like Satan talking. I've never heard it. Don't try to deceive me, Satan. But yeah, so I think overall with the film, definitely a lot of good merits, both like film-wise, story-wise, everything-wise. There's just a lot of goofy moments that sort of deflates attention. And while the goofy moments on their own merit are funny and great and everything, like it's a good amount of cheese, I feel like it's just unfortunately like it takes away from the film. While it adds something, it's also taking away something. But still a very solid film. Very happy I saw it. And any other closing thoughts about the film?
I don't know. I think we can close the casket on this one.
You know, shoot a couple of shots, you know, salute and everything.
Yeah, dude, I'm glad. I mean, they had to shoot this movie in the UK because otherwise, man, Gregory Peck would have just bought a gun and started blasting, dude. That dog would have been dead. That nanny would have been dead. I probably would have capped one in the child just to be sure, and then drug him to the church. I mean,
maybe
many things could have been solved with a gun.
Maybe in the Omen sequels. We'll be able to get that.
True.
And with that being said, we're going to give spoilers for the next film. Now, this next film, I'm pretty sure you have seen.
Oh, okay.
But I'm very curious to dive into it and kind of see what your overall thoughts are.
Oh.
It takes place 16 years before this film came out.
Oh, old.
And one of the central characters loves his mother very, very much.
Oh, Psycho?
Yeah, it's Psycho, good old 1960s Psycho. None of that Vince Vaughn Psycho or anything else like that.
I haven't seen any of the remakes, just the OGs.
Yes, understandable there. I figured with Mother's Day coming up, what an appropriate film to review and everything. Yeah. So thank you all so much for listening to this very cursed episode. And we'll see y'all again next time when we're popping the scary with Psycho Killer. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.